There's something you said that I was somewhat triggered and I had to reflect on why.
If men can outperform women in everything on a professional masculine level.
Which is what you truly believe.
Yes.
I mean, that doesn't breed trust in relationships.
Well, that sounds like tactic. That sounds like weapon.
This might be, I think, one of the single most overlooked things.
So you were saying I was a Banff?
It's just part of it.
Yeah, no, just throw it in there because I thought that was funny.
Yeah, you're just young but so wise and insightful, and with you lead this purpose-driven life, and you're just sharing content that is, I think, really uplifting and going to have an impact for generations to come. And it's very seldom you meet 25-year-old men that are creating waves in this way. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, what do you think about it? Who's really going to create the waves that you want to see in the world? Is it going to be the 50-year-old politician, or is it going to be the youth?
Well, historically, that's who we thought had the power to have an impact.
Yeah.
And I think social media is giving so many different people a platform to share their wisdom, and I think it's going to continue to affect change in meaningful ways if we use that wisely.
And from people you least expect it from, too. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I get a lot of bumps with that because I'm 25, and most people assume that
I don't know
they're
if
like...
sharing your age here was wise, I apologize.
No, it's okay, it's fine, I don't mind. I make it very clear with people. There isn't something that I hide about me. I do not want to be a performance or a projection, because I think that's what you use to manipulate people. I think people's best willingness to even work with me and to listen to this is because there's something that intrigues them on a deep level.
Yeah.
And that's because it's real. Mm-hmm. I was speaking to another psychologist the other day, and I said, hey, if we're going to have you on, how would you feel about talking a little bit about your personal life and your relationships? He said, absolutely not.
Interesting.
And I was like, I'm curious, is there like something I'm missing? Like did I miss something? Did I ask something out of the box there? And he was like, I just want to let my information speak for itself, not my personal stories. And I said, your information means something when there's a person that says it. Mm-hmm. It also even gives it more credibility. I know a lot of people think that like if I smoke cigarettes, but I'm an anti-smoker, well, that just makes you a hypocrite and a con artist, right? But also in a lot of ways, being able to present the vulnerable aspect of you, which is what I was going to do here, really, just be honest, be open, to actually have a conversation that it doesn't just revolve around information or cool ideas, but actually a space by which people are interacting with the ideas and how those ideas challenge us as individuals. And that's exactly where messages are communicated. It's with the individual itself, collectively with the flaws, the insufficiencies, the insecurities. And then now the information is not only personal, you could see how people interact with it as a human, opposed to just immediately adopting ideology. And I think that's not helping anybody.
I think it's a very fine balance between sharing information that is uplifting and beneficial to the person in question, while also sharing anecdotes from your personal life, which could add to that. I think the danger, and what I imagine this other psychologist was wary of, was breaking the kind of client confidentiality in a sense by oversharing insights from their own personal life. Not that it's sharing or divulging information from their lives, but it may make them feel more vulnerable in the sense that it seems less professional. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
That was also the whole thing, right? Which is there's no shortage of people who like to look a certain way when they help others. Mm-hmm. There is a shortage of people who want to be in the front lines of what they present. To be a practitioner or somebody that helps others, or to be a human being that does the same. Yeah. One has far more influence than the other, and it's not because he has the accumulation of information, but because he's the embodiment of the information that he communicates.
That's true.
That's the full message. It's in the individual along with that.
And so do you feel when you share your content that you're bringing a piece of yourself into that every time?
I think that's the only way to do it. And I mean that even here, right now, talking to you. Mm-hmm. I like to make sure that the first thing I bring anywhere is a piece of me, because this is for me as much as it is for everybody else.
Yeah.
I do that with my lectures.
Yeah.
And does it open up a space and leave rooms for stones to be thrown? Absolutely. But that's how you know you're really doing something meaningful. And you also do the same for others when you do that.
It takes so much courage to say things that are countercultural in the way that I think you often do, specifically when it comes to what is expected of a true feminine versus masculine energy or individual. And I think it's wonderful that there's still a voice, I believe, of reason that's advocating for something real, and that is going to continue to have, I think, meaningful impact on the family dynamic. And I think it's so misconstrued in the world we live in today, what we should look like and how we should behave, that people are left floundering with uncertainty around what it means to truly be a constructive member of a thriving relationship.
Mm-hmm. And so what pulled you to it? Because I mean, you're like anybody else who'd probably see it, which was a particular emphasis on the importance of family and a traditional masculine and feminine role. But this is the twist that I offer to it, which is it does not exist without you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we like to see these traditional masculine feminine frameworks as a bubble of restriction, right? The way that you access that, it's not so much that this bubble that we call masculine, feminine, family, nuclear family. You wouldn't believe it. I'm bringing this up because it just blew my mind. I was talking to this one coach that I was going to work with, and we eventually said, I think it's best not, because there's everything that's going to come out of my mouth is going to piss you off.
Yeah.
Like everything. And this won't be a conversation. It'll be a debate, which I'm open to too, if you are, right? And she was like, no, I'm not open to that. And I said, okay, great. Enjoy your life. I find it very interesting. Women's direct relationship to children is not relevant to part of dating. And I found it interesting because she was a biological, an evolutionary psychologist. So she really takes it from the perspective of biology in general.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, you reward that people don't have children in the dating process, then you're pretty much telling them to jump on one foot in relationship to dating. And it's like, you start to really function on 2 feet when you realize the instinct that has brought most people together. And acting like that doesn't exist not only harms women, but it also reinforces them for their absolute worst characteristics. It goes somewhere. So I was curious what you think about that.
That's quite powerful. I've never actually considered that it is actually creating such a deficit in women thinking about, extracting themselves from that biological urge, which is to ultimately be a nurturing mother and presence in a family dynamic, in a relationship. But it's so true. I see even some of the most strong and assertive women make decisions around not becoming mothers, but every so often needing to confront this internal urge and having to kind of rationalize that choice all over again. And
it's the worst thing I've ever seen.
It is such a painful thing to continuously see. And I think regardless of whether people are making this decision with all the information at hand, it's very difficult to predict how your future self might feel with reference to the decision you made at a certain time frame. And we actually do only have a certain window period, truly, to make this decision in a way that is, I think, comfortable for us as women. I know there's so much artificial intelligence and there are different ways in which we can engineer an outcome, but there are risks associated and consequences with those choices as well, including IVF, sadly. So I think that we have this finite window period to make a decision that is holistically good for us.
It's interesting, and I make this very clear to women, is that if you do not integrate your agreeability and your timeline, you're going to watch the devil come out of you when you don't get what you want. And I make this very clear for women. You can only have about a series of 5 committed relationships throughout your life, especially when it comes to fertility. And I was talking to one of my associates, and she was telling me how she dated this guy for 2 years.
Yeah. And
by the end of 2 years, now she was first 23, right, which is perfect prime time.
Yeah.
And then by the end of 2 years, he goes, I don't think I want to get married. Peace. For a guy and for a girl, that's very, very different. There's a particular kind of betrayal that women experience by not communicating their timeline to the men that they're with. And there's a particular kind of respect that women need to have for even that time in that window. And so this is what I was tying it into, what I was saying earlier. To take that away from the dating process takes power away from women.
I mean, it's true. And yet there's this kind of thinking that actually they enhance the likelihood of having the outcome they want by temporarily denying those internal instincts. So not
that's how you
expressing
repress
it.
them. And then you buy 3 French bulldogs. And then you talk about how you've transcended it.
Well, not just that. I think because we live in this highly avoidant, highly individualistic culture, specifically, I think sadly amongst young men.
I really want to talk about that, the highly individualistic culture.
Yeah, women are, and I know that we have slightly different opinions on individualism and the value of it, which is fascinating. But I think ultimately women don't always want to overstep or over-egg. They don't want to overstep to the point where they potentially push away an individual, specifically within a kind of fragile relational dynamic, which often, I say fragile, because I think the majority of relationships that are highly egocentric don't have the kind of resilience that come with someone, with the territory if 2 individuals are committed and have a mindset that is going to cultivate a stable, enduring partnership.
So you were sharing something about the highly individualistic culture that we have. And I think that the terminology individualistic is misused because individuality implies awareness, and I'm still trying to wonder where we have that in our society. So individuality and identification with things in culture are very different. Individuality is an understanding of how your actions affect others, right? The motives that you have, the dark motives you have, the needs that you repress, the parts of you that you don't want to show.
I think individualistic behaviors, however, are in some respects or to some extent synonymous with selfish behaviors. And then I guess it's a spectrum to determine whether you're truly maybe a more narcissistic individual who has, narcissistic personality disorder, or you are, that's a whole different framework, which I don't want to get into because I think that that's completely overused. So I think I just focus more on the word individualistic because I think we're so focused on the self that we often overlook the impact that our actions are having on other people, and we undermine operating, I think, as an interconnected society. And I think there is danger in overemphasizing the self, especially when it negates responsibility.
So that's actually the funny thing is that they take individuality, and in the name of individuality, you do non-individualistic things, right? For example, individuals take accountability for their actions. They understand the consequence of their actions. They understand the needs that they have. They can communicate, right?
Yeah.
And you start stripping that down and then saying individualistic. What you do is you get people to attach to the terminology without becoming any of those things that they need to be. And so the simple way to make it is pretty much in this sense, where the problem that I don't want to mix this up here because, there's just such an important emphasis on the individual in relationship to creating things like the traditional family unit, is that they do not exist without each other. And this is also very common in relationship to religiosity, right? Which is so much self-centered, right? It's like big S or small s, depends what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So an individual is aware of the big S, meaning some things outside of your own traumas, insecurities, and fears, the bubbles that you the bubbles that you interact with life. Those are the bubbles that most people function from. They're not aware of things beyond themselves. And so
I just don't think that, I think there is just danger in using the word self. There is no self in the absence of others, and we co-regulate. We are part of this interwoven tapestry of life where what affects one directly affects others indirectly, and sometimes all indirectly. And this is a very common phenomena that is displayed beautifully through social network analysis, where we can see, have you heard of the social contagion effect?
Tell me about it.
So it's basically saying that if I am directly connected to you, I am more likely to behave like you than I would by chance if I was not connected to you. So there are quite a few studies that look at obesity, but also divorce rates, and you are 45% more likely to become obese if I am obese and your direct network tie. And
talk about the power of proximity.
Exactly, and 25% more likely to become obese if you are 2 degrees of freedom away from me, and then 10% if you are 3 degrees of freedom away from me. So 3 network links away from me. So, for example...
So who you surround yourself with is probably one of the most important indicators
powerful.
of how you're going to turn up.
And your
That's one of the
influence
things for me in dating.
is powerful.
I really stay away. I stay away from a majority of women because...
Well, this is going to be a hot take.
Yeah, well, I make it very clear because a woman in your life is going to be one of the closest people in your life. You're not telling me that she's going to have the most influence over you? Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that I'd be an incredibly naive man. I think that men would be incredibly naive too if they underestimated how much value they have in their life to begin with. That makes them far more masculine. If they could identify that, then they could actually protect something of value. Then they could learn how to do that and then do it for her. And it's very important to understand that the most influential person in your life is going to be the woman you marry.
100%.
As a man, if you don't start accepting that and you don't start realizing that you should start working on it as young as you can to realize what you're looking for, you're going to end up with the very thing that takes you down.
One other thing I want to add to that, though, is that it's not just about what you are looking for. It's about what you two can cultivate together. And it's not about finding the right person. It's about creating the right partnership. And I think...
I'm curious, how would you do that?
There's quite a lot of interesting...
So you said not about finding, but creating. Which is, by the way, there's a lot of maturity in that because that implies that there's work to be done and that you need to show up and that you need to have a vision.
Love is a verb. It's a doing word. It's an action every single day, choosing to be the best version of yourself for the partnership in order to extract the best version of someone else for that partnership. But it does necessitate choosing wisely to begin with, because if that person has misaligned values, does not know who they truly are unstable in other respects, then there is danger there.
I couldn't. One of the things that just cracks me up to this very day is that if you want to have a fulfilling relationship, it's made in one decision of who you choose to be with. If you function from scarcity, you can never make a decision. If you're unaware of what you need, it's not a decision, it's just an impulse.
But that's such a heavy weight to place on an individual. Choose wisely, which is why...
Choose wisely can change the course of your life.
100%.
But it doesn't guarantee anything. There's no guarantees in life. You know, you make a choice.
I guess what I'm saying is, in addition to that, is that yes, it's so important to choose wisely, be discerning, be in touch with your be integrous, operate from that place, but also trusting your intuition, which is another very interesting phenomenon which people, I think, struggle to do. But that is important in conjunction to actually cultivating characteristics and qualities within yourself that can sustain an enduring, stable partnership. And we're so focused on what others can do for us that we don't actually cultivate what it means to be, uplifting, to create this mutually beneficial
Well, that takes
dynamic.
a lot of maturity. That also takes a value of understanding what you two are protecting and contributing together. And you can't really say that for most people in society, that they actually have a value to grow things. They don't. They have a value to find something, consume it, and if it no longer serves it, spit it out. And you don't even get the thing that you seek. And so very much, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you said, which was to show up to a relationship to what I can give to it means that I will actually achieve what I seek from it. Because there's that desire that you have in your life. And it's typically when you have to give more that's created. So there's like an additional kind of vulnerability and opening up to get that. It's not something you just find. It's something you build with someone who has a collective mutual desire for that same thing too.
Exactly. And this is what you were saying, which I think is so poignant and important, having a shared vision. But we don't often, in, I want to say, fragile relationships, have the kind of vulnerability to press in and say, this is what I desire. Because that means you're building something real, and most people don't want that. That creates fear. Most people want something superficial where they can take what they need for their own hedonistic desires and discard. And we live in a discard culture, which is exactly my point. A
narcissistic culture, I make that very clear.
Yes, and I choose to use the word individualistic instead. But this is semantics.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking semantics there. I think we agree on the same thing. I mean, there's no question about it, that if people can go about life consciously, unconscious about all of the destructive, dark aspects of themselves, and they can meet people, get what they need from them, continue to walk the walk that they need to show the world that's who they are, until, of course, there's eventually a breaking point in what most people would call they wake up, right? They wake up and they realize how their behaviors have hurt others, and how this kind of behavior is what we call, by definition, psychotic, right? Which is to take people to your own benefit and to disregard them. What
precedes that aha moment that allows people to recognize for the first time sometimes the pain that they have caused others, from your perspective?
I could speak for myself here. And for the client that I've worked with, I've experienced it myself. I don't even need to share a particular philosophy. Is when I realize how dishonest I am in my life. Dishonest.
I want to challenge that and say it may have been preceded by your own breakdown.
What do you mean?
Where I think often, once again, going back to this individualistic theory, I think only when you have been disappointed truly and hurt in the ways that you have potentially disappointed and hurt others, can you become fully aware of the impact of those actions. until you take the punch that you throw out.
Exactly. Which is the one that knocks you down, that makes you really reconsider your actions.
That takes a long time. People have to go through multiple iterations of different dynamics. And
you need to have a willingness. And I do find it very interesting that if people do not protect anything in their lives, the only thing they seek to protect is their very ego. And that's all they're left with. They remain in complete and total isolation, especially if they're very capable. They can continue interacting with their vicious cycles and reinforcing their biases, becoming further and further from the parts of themselves they need to face.
Which is why it's so important that we recognize that we are relational beings, we are pack animals, and we actually ultimately need others to co-regulate and to become better versions of ourselves and fully whole and integrated individuals. It doesn't happen in the isolation of other people. It's nice to think that way because that's easy. But truly, when you see people that have emerged from brokenness and deep trauma, a sign of true wholeness and an individual that has healed and done the work is someone who's able to reintegrate into healthy relational patterns.
Okay, interesting. So you take somebody in a really bad relational pattern, and I'll just to really dive into the other question and tie this into what you're saying.
Yeah.
Somebody is really, I mean, when does somebody really change, especially when it comes to their vicious cycles, until they realize they become the very thing that they never wanted to be?
I don't know. Do you think people set out in life thinking about what they don't want to be?
Most people are animated by the trauma that hurt them, that then shaped their very cause and effect, and then they become the very thing that has hurt them.
I think there's danger in focusing on what you don't want.
Well, of course, here's the thing though, but we do that on a subconscious level.
I know.
If somebody yells at you at a very young age, you're more than likely to not do that and actually create a more docile personality, somebody who doesn't speak or communicate. If you've been abused by somebody that shows charisma, charismatic, charm, and very, very well spoken, you know, protective as a woman, you're going to eradicate that as you look for it in dating, as you find men who reject that, as you do the same,
I think that's a very interesting assumption because that actually...
It's actually quite interesting. I'd love to share more about it in relationship to my clients, because I don't know if people talk about this, but the very things that you reject, that you're attracted to, you'll have somebody that rejects those exact same things and has no relationship with them. Meaning if two repressed people are the best couple for each other, and they are doomed to find out the parts of themselves that they've repressed, and this is why you hear this a lot, which is, why is it 6 months in they become the very monster that my ex was?
You almost like date your unfinished business.
You date your unfinished business. Isn't that beautiful? But what does all unfinished business show? Shows your face for the first time. And this is something beautiful about reality and life in general. If you do not face what you are capable of doing to others, then the idea of goodness doesn't exist. You need to be able to see that so that you can start incorporating that into your life and then becoming a good person. And that's the classic betrayal story of what most people have, especially in relationships. Most people's traumas are actually from people closest to them.
Well, I also want to point out...
That's also sad.
Yeah, that is true. But it's because they have the most power over us. They actually are the individuals that have shaped our triggers to a large extent. So it makes total sense. But there's something, before we move on, that I wanted to highlight. In social science, there is this concept of modeling, which is often overlooked in therapeutic practice. But we become often what we see modeled or played out before us, especially, you know...
Important to have healthy father figures in the house.
Well, healthy role models in general. And it can come in different shapes and sizes. It doesn't have to be the father within your family home. Ultimately, that's the most powerful.
Well, I noticed that for one thing, having the father in the home makes not only the men stronger, but the women know what they're looking for in a man. Men have a
they
particular...
respect themselves better if they have a father who's protected them and taught them about their
they
worth.
understand their own value.
And they're more secure in their ability to attach meaningfully because they've seen that ultimately if there is a father in the home, for the most part, you'd like to believe there is an interplay between husband and wife that is overall positive enough in order to sustain a relationship.
In order to sustain a relationship. So I think that's something really beautiful there. There's something that you said earlier, which was getting people to sustain healthy relationships, right? That's a sign of a person that has actually done the growth, that they could sustain that, right? Versus somebody who just talks about it. Well, anyways, I wanted to hear a little bit more about your, you call it social science?
Yes. Well, behavioral science, however you want to frame it. But there's this concept of modeling, which I think is very powerful. And we need... And so there's this interplay, sorry, let me prefix this. My desire for the space of social psychologists and coaches like yourself is to recognize the value of having good models within the context of community. So we have powerful decisions to make every day. Who do we interact with? Do we recognize the influence they have? Do we understand the concept of social contagion? And are we reaching out to the right people in order to bring about the changes in our lives that we desire? We become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Time is precious.
You know, modeling is actually a very common coaching technique, and it's actually one of the ones that I used in my life. And it was to help me access parts of myself. You play characters, right? It's actually what kids do. They create alter egos, right? It's a healthy part of their development.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people have those healthy role models in their life. And you know, most of the good role models are dying.
But you can seek them out.
You could seek them, but the thing is the importance of somebody being authentic and honest. And I'm kind of a little more cynical in this regard, that most of the good role models that you see aren't a role model at all. They're just a projection of all of the things that you wish you were. A role model is somebody that's deeply connected to those values and is an embodiment of those. And you know, you think about some of the people that we looked up to. They weren't a facade or an idea. No, they were actually the real deal. You understand what that means for you is that you can achieve that. Now it's more of an arbitrary idea than something you can actually connect to. And that's the problem with a deteriorating society in general is that the overall role models start to become what I make this very clear, that the majority of men are predators. And so that doesn't make women feel safe at all. And that's exactly what happens to men when they're disconnected from their values.
Yeah.
They only seek to feed themselves.
Yeah.
And they don't even know it.
So interesting. I mean, you shared so many nuggets of wisdom in this, but so interesting. I think it's really important, just to get back to the point I made previously, that regardless of all these things that we see that are harmful and going to cause deleterious outcomes for us and future generations in terms of, as you say, predatory behavior, for example, is to be aware of the harm that causes and to make proactive decisions to move away from that, so that even if it is just you and even if it is just making an effort to interact with one individual that displays characteristics that are positive and has positive influence on those around them, we can in turn change ourselves, and that is all we have in our control, and then that has an influence on others. So just to make this point more clear, I implemented an intervention teaching parents nonviolent alternatives to discipline. So shifting norms in an entire population in a South African community of over 1,000 caregivers. We call them caregivers because there are very few individuals who sadly, are the biological parents that have caregiving responsibilities of the children. And we found that targeting a subset of individuals in that community, so only 25% of people, teaching them the value of being more attuned to their children's needs and offering them different, more positive, constructive ways of disciplining their children, affected change across an entire community. So we saw a shift over a 3-year longitudinal time frame from cold, harsh parenting, more abusive styles of parenting, to more warm, positive, constructive.
Well, yes, survival-oriented parenting still exists even in a modern world. It's just decorated now, and it's hard to identify. It doesn't just exist in the third world.
But the point is that we can affect change just by targeting a handful of people. We can't affect change across the board, which is why I value what you do, because you are proactive in making some of these insights tangibly accessible to men and women that desperately need answers in such a broken society. So you're doing great work, even if you're only seeing the impact on a subset of people that exist in the world.
I guess, that you birth that belief in showing up for yourself, like as if you're the only person in your life that you want to change for your own good. And
that's so true. And having the courage to do that every day.
That's what I realized made this work.
Yeah.
I saw what it did for me and what it continues to do for me. And I lead that revolution with others behind me doing the same. It starts with an individual with a desire not just to change, but to grow. And growth and change are in the exact same place in life. And it also a serious internal question that I believe most people don't ask when they have all the devices in the world to learn about themselves and who they are. Like, pick up a history book, for God's sake. You'll learn more about human nature than you ever have. You have an infinite amount of information to help understand yourself in ways that you never could throughout human history. And the more you understand yourself, well, the more then you have to give, right? And that very willing discovery typically is birthed in what I believe is understanding the consequence of your actions. And not through so much the good you can do, but through how much you can destroy people and the world as you know it.
Well, this is what the emphasis should be instead. It's not just about learning about self in the absence of the other. It's about learning truly about the impact of self in a community context. We are all
that's very
connected.
Profound. We're all, I mean, that's actually where morality comes into the picture, how you treat others, you know, when you can create a very highly narcissistic society by doing a few things. Well, one, you make everything about the self, and I say the self with a small s. And also there's not a lot of awareness behind that either, right? That there's this kind of, you determine the way things are. I mean, that's also like the deterioration of consciousness, if you want to use like biblical metaphors for it, right? Which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I promise this is going to end well. Never does, right? But there's a kind of fruit in that, right? There's the fruit that you can be like the unique image, right? And that whole thing creates a spiral or a downfall of consciousness, right? Takes you out of your like paradisal state of development or the natural process of life that we know it, nature. Yeah. And I believe that seed has become one of the biggest ones that has created the biggest downfall in relationships, right? Because it's no longer about what you can construct and what you can connect to and to who you can become through the things that you voluntarily choose. Right? There is something about that isn't, because you know, when you talk to 4 people and all 4 of them have a messianic complex, you start to become a little concerned, right? When most people are beginning to have relationships, but their whole relationships, even when they talk about relationships, it all revolves around them. You already know it's going to collapse, right? And so this is where I think there's an evolution of it, which is the individual is necessary when it's tethered to a system of values that allow it to flourish. Without it, it's completely and totally hubristic, meaning it's just your ego feeding things that you like to hear about yourself as you create minimal progress in your life. And this is the incorporation of an ideal, and I talk about this a lot. I think it's one of the most important things for people, which is there's a reason why when people close their eyes when they're in front of the person that they desire, that they see a family. It's not because somebody ingrained that in you, because that very ideal improves you in your pursuit of it. You might not have it, but your willingness to at least go, I want to be that. Yeah. That's gone now. That doesn't exist anymore. And that creates the tragedy that we see a lot of.
In the absence of the set of values.
In the absence of an ideal, meaning something that we aspire towards that is...
And the ideal is created by a framework of values.
Beautifully said. An ideal is created by a framework of values. And I really speak about values a lot more because sometimes when I mention it, I have people that are in their 30s that have been doing the same thing and they never even question how their actions affect others. Yeah. And then you go, okay, well then what do you value? And I just had a women's group today and it was a very, very powerful group and I thought you'd find it interesting. I'll talk about a few more things, right? Which is one of the things that I found was very interesting in this group was she used to be religious and then she met her husband who was an atheist. And then all of the things that were in the prior relationship that there was trauma around, she almost neglected everything. I mean, that's more of the psychological evaluation. But really, she was wondering why in this relationship she wanted to leave. She's been married to the guy. She's been dating for 7 years, married for 3 months, spent $200,000 on a wedding. And people are doing this by the masses. It's not just her. Wow. And then, of course, by the end of it, she's like, oh, I wouldn't even care if I left right now. And it was like, whoa, how unaware can you be about your life? About your actions, how it affects others, and what you're running from. What I did find was very interesting that today we spoke about it, which was...
Unaware in the sense that she had actually betrayed her core values in favor of a relationship.
In favor of a relationship that made her the very monster that she was afraid of becoming in the first relationship where she was abused. Wow. This is what I find is very interesting about life, and also about traumas, because you focus a lot on traumas. And I do think that there's an importance of that in our lives. It's not something to be completely eradicated. There's, even in alcohol, there's no such thing as 100% pure, right? It just doesn't exist that way. There's also something kind of immature about that. There's also something godless about that. A complete and total eradication of human fault isn't spiritual at all, actually. That's the opposition.
That's not the goal.
No.
To the extent, I mean, even if you think about, even if you think about conflict, it's such a beautiful opportunity to cultivate deeper connection with your partner. One would argue, some might feel like conflict is just this horrible thing that we need to run from and eradicate. We shouldn't have that.
It's the place for your humanity and an opportunity to come closer.
But in the total absence of conflict, there is no relationship. Because two people cannot coexist and not have some discrepancies on opinion and thought. If they're truly bringing them full selves to the relationship.
That's how you know they're not a human, right?
Yeah.
I love this one. I can't remember if it was 12 interactions. 9 of them need to be positive in order for it to be a healthy relationship.
No, that's actually not quite right.
You tell me.
So for every 5 positive, so for every 1 negative interaction, there needs to be 5 positive interactions within a conflict. But 20 positive interactions overall for every conflict. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that just goes to show how negative interaction is and how positive interaction isn't quite as powerful as negative interaction is bad.
And
right?
within the conflict situation, something as small as a smile, the acknowledgement of someone's point, those can move the needle in a positive direction.
Oh, you could de-escalate situations like crazy if you don't shut down. Yeah.
Humor is such a beautiful gift.
It's a big one in...
Actually, humor is a wonderful way to truly connect people.
It's also a great way to hide. I say that with firsthand experience.
Yeah.
I mean, you could use it to hide. You could use any characteristic. You could hide behind your beauty. You could hide behind your charisma. You can filibust with your romantic, poetic words, and all you need to say is, "I want sex." But truth be told, if we don't have these things under control,
since Adam and Eve emerged from the Garden of Eden, we were hiding under clothes. Everything changes at some point. It's not. We all conceal some facets of ourselves at different moments in time. There's nothing wrong with concealing, as long as you are aware of what it is you truly desire and how concealing certain things at different times might bring about positive outcomes. We don't have to lay bare every part of ourselves in every interaction.
So I'm curious, you work in the relationship space too?
Yeah.
As in like relationship counseling?
Yes.
How's that been?
It's been an interesting journey. It's quite a new journey for me. What I've mostly been doing is civil, commercial, and family legal mediations.
Oh, so like a divorce lawyer.
Essentially, yeah. Moving people from really contemptuous conflict situations towards greater freedom and liberation. So allowing themselves to recognize what it is that causes them to cling onto assets and things that actually are trivial in the biggest scheme of things.
Oh, that's a big thing. When people are going through a breakup, something I noticed is that often, typically one of the partners will start attaching to something that in relationship to their own integrity is literally worthless. And they will start to continue to interact with the toxic spiral in the name of something that they left over at the house when it has nothing to do with that thing of value. I don't care if you left your Rolex. I don't care if it was your dog.
Yeah.
Let it go. Because what you're becoming is something monstrous and you're not even aware of that. And on top of it, your integrity meter, you're becoming morally bankrupt.
Exactly.
As you start to interact with those things of value, forgetting that the real thing of value was always you.
But,
talk about a nightmare.
Yes. But you know what's at the heart of that? It seems like a trivial thing. Oh, I'm just fighting for this $50,000 thing when I have, a surplus of money in the bank. It's truly that when the conflict ends, the relationship ends. And that's what people are clinging on to.
When the conflict ends, the relationship ends? As in, oh, okay, interesting. So you're saying that when there is a deteriorating relationship, and the very inability to resolve the conflict, right? As in, now
gives you leverage over that person, means there's still a tie to that individual, and it's not totally over. So when people are still stuck in a phase of denial, so for example, we're married, we have 3 homes together, and we can't decide about how to divide the assets, and essentially what often it boils down to is just a discrepancy of, say, $50,000. And sometimes these conflicts can carry on for 3+ years. And when you really sit down with people and evaluate why they're holding on to this, you realize that it was never about the money. It was never about the home. It was
because they don't want to lose the person, right? And that's what you were trying to implement, which is that's when it's over. So that's when the grieving process starts. And so very much their inability to accept that it's over makes them attached to things that in relationship to the value that they have, they completely make that little thing. It's like their last little bit of hope to keep that relationship on fire. It's like a pseudo
sense of closeness. But when all is said and done and those divorce papers are truly signed, that's really over. And that's really painful.
Well, you should see how destructive people are. It's not over until people make a decision for it to be over.
They let that linger because that allows them to live in a state of denial for longer. And that is a slightly more sheltered position.
I'm curious because I know that a lot of the relationship stuff that I talk about, what were some of the things that you were like, what's this about here? Not sure I quite get it. Or maybe some things that you've seen in your practice.
There's something you said that really struck a chord with me. I was somewhat triggered and I had to reflect on why. I think it was you speaking about how men can do things 10x times things in finance versus women, and how when women step into their nurturing space, that's their true superpower. And I really had to unpack that because in the modern time we live in, I see women truly often outperform men in that sense.
In what sense?
In a vocational sense, whatever sector they're in, not outperform it all the time.
In school? Or?
School, also in their different vocational spheres. There are many men who don't perform.
School is not catered to men in any way.
But the concept
it's
of a
catered
man,
to women.
Sure, but the concept of a man is so broad. Think about the number of different sorts of men you meet on a day-to-day basis and the different sorts of women you meet on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
There might be one woman that is on the upper echelon of society that is always going to outperform a man in the lower rung of society. So
yeah, but you can do that with
that,
anything. If you take an average dude
a blanket
versus
statement is dangerous.
No, I think women protect themselves from things that are very true, and they have a lot of insecurities they haven't faced in relationships and some absolutes about reality.
And men.
And men too, but I don't think men do it as much as women do. Partially
they do
because,
it differently. They're less emotional about it, but they do conceal insecurities.
Well, I'm making this
ways.
very clear about women in relationship to hearing how about men excel in professional fields in ways that women don't, and in relationship to how women do things actually cannot be replicated in any way, shape, or form. And there are some women at a particular echelon that could do it as good as some professional men. But as a whole, that statement is true, and there are exceptions to every rule, right? But I do find it interesting that people cling to the exception, which just makes me realize that they're probably afraid of facing the part of themselves that they need to face in relationship to that. Like not feeling enough is a big thing, right? And I noticed that.
Do you think it's a function of historic conditioning? So I know coming from...
Okay, keep going.
So as Jewish people in a more traditional sort of society or context,
mm-hmm.
usually, ordinarily, at least historically, there were distinct roles. There are distinct roles still. And I think your judgment, but also your conviction with which you share this is informed by your conditioning and my conditioning.
Well, yeah, I think everybody's part of that.
With what you're sharing.
You can be completely aware of it. Actually, I don't think that somebody's personal experiences and that they actually have been raised a certain way detracts from the fact that they can see something. I think it gives them an angle at the very thing that can be seen at many dimensions. That's why I talk about the importance of integrating your humanity, your individuality in relationship to what you see. If I were to repress that, I would be having what you call a projection. And then my conviction would be rooted in delusion. So
let me get this clear. I just want to make sure I understand. And it's not that I disagree with you. I think I'm trying to represent the voice of the average woman that doesn't have the privilege of sitting here in front of you asking these questions. Do you truly believe that men outperform women in all vocational sectors? Or only when they are sectors that don't require nurturing, care, compassion?
I mean, what a woman is, what a man is very, very different. And that's been since the dawn of time. And to test somebody's potential and their particular authenticity is the way that you're going to see their gift, right? Something irreplaceable to the world is what we call a gift. People need to survive, and I understand that to be the case. And people can be good at anything. Hell, there's some men that are good at nurturing, right? Probably better than most women nowadays, right? Which is a tragedy. But to discredit what I was saying there, which is true, it's nothing to do with what I believe, more than that to be something that helps people interact with the internal gifts that they have as a woman and as a man. And I believe that helps men and women come closer to each other in ways. Like the very shift that women want to see in men happens when they begin to understand the value of them being a feminine woman. Mm-hmm. Men are responsive beings, pretty girls in a classroom. They're like this, right?
That's true. Yeah.
No all boys classroom. They're throwing spitballs and crumpled up papers, and they're shouting at each other, and deodorant isn't relevant in the conversation, right? Put one pretty girl and they're all standing straight. And so there is a tremendous amount of value in that. Actually, mature men grow to realize the value in a feminine woman to the point where their whole life becomes in protection of that, which evolves them to become the very man they dream of becoming.
That's so true.
So I don't want that to be gone. And I would love to see people let go of those things.
But I think it's a countercultural message that people are engaging with defensively.
Yes,
even myself, and even someone who values being a feminine woman. I think it's maybe it hits a chord with me because I'm
It hits an insecurity in every woman and in every man.
I think I think what does make me respond defensively is the lack of nuance in the statement.
Well, we just created nuance there by you bringing it up.
I mean, maybe, but when it's presented, and I think that's what creates power. It's presenting a message with true conviction. And I think what often lets us down is when we do entertain too much nuance, because it kind of discredits what we
exactly
what we
right
say.
what you initially said, and so
and
nuance is there to help
scientist-
you connect to it, right? But then you eventually create so much nuance until eventually somebody says these words, and I immediately hate it in any debate. It's all about balance. That's pretty much when you played France in World War II.
Well,
you discredited the initial conflict, right? That was so that you can create a connection.
Yeah, and it's something that I have to consciously, be aware of quite often as a scientist, because we do have to hold multiple narratives. I mean, I think multiple narratives can coexist. And I think it's important that we give room to the possibility that our perspectives may not be fully formed. And I think having this lunchbox mentality, I don't know if you've heard of this.
What are you implying? I have who has a lunchbox personality? Sorry, what do you call it?
No, not you. I mean, you do have a lunchbox personality. That's what you should have.
A lunchbox personality. I don't know what most of the terms are, but I love it.
We talk about the playground, but if you could just superimpose yourself as a young child on a playground with a lunchbox in hand, you were a sponge. You were receptive to learning and taking on board whatever was being shared. That's ultimately what's led you to this place of, wisdom.
My Spider-Man lunchbox. That was the
Really?
Yeah, I loved it.
Mine was full of goodness. My mom was very health conscious. There's the points of contention.
I love it.
But the point is that the image, I think, is so beautiful, and it's important for us to maintain a growth mindset.
So yeah, when I talked about what I was talking about, actually, those are absolutes about reality that make it very difficult for people to grow and develop and create maturity and face insecurities that every human being has. Like, as a woman, you have insecurities as a woman. As a man, you have insecurities as a man.
Yeah.
That pokes into the insecurities of women in relationship to men, right? What does it also shine a light on? A kind of a particular
egocentrism.
Well, here, you'll love this. A vulnerability that women have in relationship to men.
Why not the other way around?
That if, for example, if men can outperform women in everything on a professional masculine level, right?
Which is what you truly believe.
Yes. And I only say that because I think that women are tremendously harmed by trying to cope when they see that. I think that a woman that has something to offer can say that and go, yeah, and I'm still good at what I do. But I find it very interesting that when people's insecurities get tugged on something that's true about reality, it only makes them more delusional and actually less connected to the sense of value that they do have. And for example, I don't pull a lot of value from it, but a lot of women now do pull a lot of value from their expertise, right? But if somebody were to say something that, oh, my nurturing ability sucks, right? Why aren't men upset when I hear that? There's no value associated to it. We understand it, we accept it. We almost accept the vulnerability that we have as men to not be as nurturing. Doesn't mean we can't.
No. I think that we have been conditioned to believe that nurturing is a feminine quality. Men have been conditioned to believe this, in which case they don't want to be associated with it. Whereas women in modern society have been...
Who doesn't want to be associated with it?
Men don't want to be associated with feminine qualities.
Yeah, because
it doesn't
their
serve
definition
them.
of masculine is robotic.
But you were saying that why are men not offended by it when a woman says, oh, they're not very nurturing? It's because they don't want to be associated with those qualities necessarily in the way that women in modern times want to be associated with, efficiency and success
because women need to
vocationally.
survive. And I promise you this much, women are surviving now more than they ever have throughout any point of history. Okay?
In other words, they're not thriving.
They're not thriving. And so that particular...
I also think that isn't entirely based in
I think
reality,
that
statistically.
Well, you can ask women in general, is that when they start to adopt more masculine characteristics, that's called a form of survival. It's a byproduct of trauma. It's a form of protection. The feminine essence is very untouched. It develops. It's creative. It's something that starts and fuels inspiration. It's the very vessel of life itself.
But it's also in response to it's also in response to oppression. And for the longest time, when I went to Oxford University, and it was only 40 years ago...
Are you sure that's not conditioning?
No, wait. It was only 40 years ago that the first woman was admitted to New College, which was the college I was based at. That's only 40 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to kind of see the downfall of society since a lot of these ideas started to become forerunning at the forerunners for a lot of people who haven't faced a lot of their insecurities in relationship to human inadequacy. We all share that.
So women having the opportunity or privilege to study, educate themselves in advance,
I
you
never
think
said
has
that.
been the downfall. No, this isn't me being antagonistic. This is
No,
me
I'm
wanting
enjoying
to
I'm
understand.
enjoying the conversation.
I really want to understand. Can you make room for the possibility that there has been some good? I know there's been a lot of...
We're here having a conversation, right? You know, and
Yeah.
to deny that there is some good would be, again, the whole thing about that the trauma hasn't also incorporated the gift, right? But to continue going along with that without facing the insecurities is the very thing that makes that very effort meaningless. It's called overcorrection, right? Where you go, okay, well, that probably wasn't so good, right? And then we created things that were beautiful. We've experienced it.
There are some people that are overcorrecting, and there are some that are trying to self-actualize and have been given the opportunity for the first time.
And the people that are overcorrecting tend to be very loud and tend to really, really, really want positions of power. So that makes those that don't want to overcorrect, who aren't very loud, oppressed by those, right? So the very oppression that
that's going to be true.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important for that there are people that are going to be fueled by things, not just other than insecurity. I think that drives everybody to some extent, but really like a deeper intention, a deeper motive, something that really is for the sake of a greater good, you know? And you have to be able to discern those things. And so I take something like that because people do need to interact with it. And if you were to say men and women's brains are very different, and because our brains are very different on a biological level, that means men excel in certain things that where women don't, and men don't excel in areas where women do, right? And so those things aren't designed to be triggering, but I notice that when people feel that they're either A, can't be recognized for their skill, which I find is also very interesting, nobody said that, right? That majority of women do attach their value to that because society has went out of its way to target women and make them feel that their sense of value comes through that. Also another reason why men aren't going to be so hindered by when they aren't good at nurturing. Not because they do not have nurturing qualities. I wouldn't be much of a leader unless I did.
Yeah, that's true.
I would be a piece of a man if I had no compassion for the people that come into my group that
it's all just in
not
response
those
to, it's true, it's all just us responding to contextual conditioning and trying to make sense, or trying to cultivate lives of purpose and value. And I think we don't operate and exist in isolation. Whatever's happening outside of ourselves is going to manifest internally in some way, shape or form. So I think we should offer ourselves grace in all of this because, yes, it's so important to recognize that, leaning into your nurturing tendencies as a woman is going to empower you because that is our true strength. I completely agree. Yeah. But we are confronted with a unique set of different challenges, specifically in a society that's increasingly...
As humans, we all are.
Increasingly unwilling to commit and actually do life in partnership with one another. So we cannot actually, sadly, as often as we used to, derive benefit from symbiotic partnerships between, heterosexual entities, because ultimately this is what we're speaking about, heterosexual dynamics, how we can amplify the good in the other by actually being...
Yeah, it's a tremendously vulnerable thing. I had this conversation with a woman the other day, and it was really funny. A lot of people don't like to use the words masculine and feminine because then there's going to be associations to personality or characteristics. So what they do is they make up other terminologies that mean the exact same thing, which have the exact same internal implication, right? And so she was telling me how, I was asking her, how are your relationships thing going? She's like, I've been dating this guy for 2 years. And one of my big insights that allowed me to start dating was there are monkey men and turtle men. And I was already like, where are you going with this, right?
That's
and then she goes,
cute.
well, my whole life I was a monkey woman, so I would clash with monkey men. And so what I realized was I had to let go of that so that I could start dating turtle men. And I said, how's this working out for you right now? She said, doing pretty good. I said, call me when you have children. And what I found was very interesting is that if women don't see the part of them...
Turtle men being... those that are more in touch with their feminine.
Yeah, no, well, that was the whole thing, is that I think that she was creating association in splits, right? One or the other, right? Which is, by the way, a disservice to people, right? People exist with both. Feminine exists with masculine. Masculine exists with feminine. Actually, true masculine is, and you'd love this about alpha male chimps, is that they have 3 times the empathy of the matriarchal chimp of the troop.
Wow.
And they have twice the strength of the average male. So what makes them isn't that they're the strongest. They're not the strongest. They have 3 times the empathy and they're twice as strong. And that's what creates he treats others with respect, but also has authority, but not to push others down, but to bring the troop up, right? That's the qualities and characteristic of a very connected, unwounded male.
It's
right?
like servant-hearted leadership.
Servant-hearted leadership, right? And it's driven through heart, right? And I always make this very clear that women really create that space for people. That life is good. That belief comes from women. And you want to know what also comes from women when they raise children? You are good. And you are worthy of unconditional love. And if you're good, you're born for greatness. Those beliefs are imbued in the child at a young age from a mother that's connected to that. It's why I do this, you know, and femininely inspired, of course, as every man should be. What are you inspired by if not that? You see it in art, you see it in film. It's in the very being that we can be loved unconditionally, and that comes from the feminine. That's what evolves us, not only as men, but as a society collectively, and as mankind. We need that, you know? You put a number on that, I mean, hey, that's irreplaceable. And that very essence is very difficult for women to interact with too. I can unconditionally love things. Well, that could totally f me over. Yeah, it does a lot of the time for a lot of women because they're unaware of that.
Yeah.
So my only very message is to women is that they connect to that and then integrate that into their lives and know that that is the pursuit, not the other way around.
Do you think women are more able to love unconditionally than men?
I think that when women have children, men are pretty much useless for like the first 7 years.
But that doesn't really answer the question.
I think that women have that and they teach it in ways that allows men to do the same. There are similar things, like if we're on different ends of the spectrum, if the male progression goes this way, the female progression goes that way, there's a certain point where we're really far away from each other, right? Now, we start to learn these things when we interact in like sexual dynamics, sexual spaces, right? That's the whole point of knowing somebody, right? Using like the biblical term.
Yeah.
But those things are the ones that make us feel the most polarity, admiration, respect, and it brings that really deep desire in men to protect it, but it also shows that men have that within them. You know, it's like, you can tell a really good guy based off his relationship with his mother. I know that sounds really interesting. And you could tell a guy based off a relationship with his mother. It's like if you ever go on a date with a guy, just ask him, what's your relationship with your mom? Oh, that bitch. You already know how this is going to end for you, I promise you, right? And people can have honor for their parents. Maybe not love them in ways because some parents suck, but they can have honor. So I was really bringing this up because I do believe that there's particular aspects of the feminine and particular aspects of the masculine that really make us look to each other with genuine curiosity to know each other. That is the polarity that brings men and women together.
That is so true. And I have seen this manifest so often. As soon as you step out of your feminine as a woman, you do tend to push away a man that truly is in his masculine, which is ultimately what you desire.
Well, isn't that tragic, right? When women don't understand the necessity of them being connected to their femininity, they push away the men that they truthfully desire, respect, and admire, and actually hurt.
And ultimately, it isn't... once again, I keep on reverting back to this, but these shifts in dynamics aren't happening in isolation either. Often
they never happen in
women
isolation.
tend to need, like there's a necessity for women often to step up because, at least in most contexts, men aren't taking responsibility in the way that they should, or they abscond that responsibility. So yes, then women are forced to step into their masculine in order to provide. Yeah,
and by the way, you want to know what happens to men in fatherless homes? They don't become strong, bold, forward, unapologetically themselves. They become silently manipulative and cowards and destructive beyond measure.
So true. It's sad.
Because guess if they don't learn from their father, who do they learn from?
You know, often unhealthy
their mother.
Role models.
But guess what? Single mothers are not role models. It's dangerous. Actually, the very essence of the mother changes when there isn't a father. And then, of course, the son, we're just using that as will start to model himself after the mother. And a lot of his male characteristics will be back end.
Well, since the majority of us are actually, do actually get raised by single mothers who are trying their best.
So tragic. I think it's like 55% of homes.
Yes.
It's insane.
But we still, often when you look at the products or the fruit of those homes, it's not all bad. Yes, there are negative elements, but it also hones a kind of resilience I guess it's different if it's a woman raised by a single mother or, a daughter versus a son. But I do think it can hone a kind of resilience that can be positive and channeled in uplifting directions for those individuals. And then there are others who come from perfect, idyllic family setups.
Yeah, and they're pieces of shit. And I could speak for myself when I say that. I came from a very, very wonderful, strong, beautiful, loving household.
Yeah.
And I was still a piece of shit.
You were so young, but you're still so young, and look at you now.
Doing better, thank God. And
yeah. Carrying those lessons forward.
Yeah, carrying those lessons forward. That was actually one of the reasons why I started this, was when I realized, like, trauma or not, you can still be a grade A piece of shit. What's this about? Well, there's responsibility in life. Yeah. That scares people. And I always, even for men, do you want to know what makes them get really triggered? When you talk about how they're cowards. They don't want to be cowards. Right? But you also talk about if men run away from responsibility, that's what they become by a byproduct of it. Do you know what happens to men if they do not face the harshness of realities? They do not become strong to face it. I didn't say that you have to just...
It's a muscle.
It's a muscle. You understand that? Like, if I don't show up to my job, I'll get fired. Harsh reality. I mean, not really harsh. Reality, right?
Yeah.
If I don't work with a willingness of blood, sweat, and tears, then I have an expectation from the world to give me something that I didn't work for. Entitled. Name a woman that likes an entitled man. So the same thing with women. They need to accept harsh implications about reality in relationship to their femininity. It doesn't handicap them. It's the very thing that sets you free. And I make that very clear, that sometimes with those controversial points that I have, those things have existed since the dawn of time and have proven to be true with very, 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 very rare exceptions. And because there's such rare exceptions, you call them anomalies, you actually don't use them in statistics.
I think it is just increasingly difficult for women to actually press into the feminine qualities that make them feel often fully alive and allow them to be nurtured in the way they truly desire.
It's so difficult.
In the face of adversity. And life is challenging. It's a harsh, challenging place.
Imagine that.
So it's one thing to crucify a woman for the dearth of that specific quality, but ultimately, how do you think you could help or elevate women to press into that part, that very essence of their kind of nature, without creating weakness that prevents them from actually being strong providers? Often in
women provide in ways that men also nurture, right? Like we really...
You're speaking about this in a kind of idealized sense where two people are operating well in partnership with one another. But I think where there's breakdown in society is when there's breakdown in the family dynamic. I think the family is the building block of a healthy society.
Of course, and without that you don't have an individual, and without the individual there is no evolution of humanity. It deteriorates. You become oppressed by any tyranny that exists, because tyranny needs opposition all the time, and it needs individuals to identify that, right? And if you do not stand up for the very being that's you could watch it die. That's another harsh implication.
That is so powerful. Yeah. I wasn't sure for a minute where you were going with that, but that came full circle.
So yeah, I think these are all related points, and if I had to tell anything to women, it's, hey, your femininity is not going to be easy to connect to. I want you to remember this. It's an ideal that you strive towards. You don't just become. Right? If I said I need to be this masculine man, okay, I guarantee you, I will start rationalizing that I am before I am. If I don't let that very drive shape me, mold me, and also accept my inadequacies, and that's a very big thing for men that I help them on becoming more masculine, is that, like, actually in the process of accepting your inadequacies, your insufficiencies, your insecurities, you become transformed through life in the masculine journey.
Vulnerability.
The vulnerability of that, right? So
because that's what breeds true connection.
Exactly. And there's no shortage of sociopaths and narcissists, and you could tell a really big indicator of that is that they do not have insufficiencies, insecurities, or vulnerabilities.
They have no empathy.
Guess what? They only work in opposition of everything that's good. They become the destructive male force.
Oh, that's so true.
And so what actually opened me up, and this is going to be for women too, but there's almost an accepting of the fact that you have a lot of things that are not what you want to be. Yeah. That very first step of accepting that opens you up to becoming it. And by the way,
becoming more of what you want, or moving away from that.
Experiencing your life. That's for everyone. When people experience their life with the pursuit of an ideal that really means something to them, they don't just transform. They experience a deep, deep dialogue that makes them understand that they're not alone. When people experience that, I go, oh, did you hear that? I did. then you can continue listening to that deep, still, silent, small voice that calls inside each and every single one of our souls towards the best betterment of ourselves.
And the beauty of that is when people truly step into their power, recognizing what they need to do in order to create a life, to lead a life worthy of the calling that they have, they allow others in turn to do the same.
Beautiful. I wanted to really add an extra point to the whole helping women connect to the femininity aspect of things, is that, there's two other corrections, right? You could be a woman that goes, you could already tell a woman's belief if she likes her femininity or not based off how masculine she is, right? It's like very simple.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the embodiment of that, right? Oh,
Okay.
I can already tell your relationship with your femininity based off the commitments that you've made and the things that you claim to be valuable, right? Not positive, right? Of course, that's how you could see anybody. You could already tell somebody's relationship with their emotions based off their past experiences of any person displaying them, right? You're like, okay, I'll pay a little close attention here. And yeah, men that run away from responsibility typically run to women and use them as shields. If men run from parts of themselves that just were displayed in perhaps a very tragic father figure that was very aggressive and domineering and controlling, they run to the mother and drain the mother dry with the things that they were running from. So it's like, if you aren't willing to face...
It's such an interesting phenomenon, but it is so true. And it is so sad to see that play out in households and how it impacts the atmosphere in home, the fear that it causes, the destructive energy, force field around these people. And they actually often, they don't know how to come back towards an integrated sense of self, because they can't truly fully recognize those parts of themselves that are so destructive. They can't really see it in clear view. And even if they do, they revert back to these maladaptive tendencies because that's the only way they know how to truly survive.
Yeah, but that's the danger of not understanding the moral responsibility you have from life, which is, I get it, we all have to. But look at what you not being aware of you just surviving does to those closest to you and what you become. And that wakes people up. That wakes them up in ways that they make them start paying more attention. So now they become more present.
But this is so true. This is true for most people, and I guess we're all on this bell curve, and we speak about different disordered states as being on a spectrum. But when you're actually being confronted with a malignant narcissist, they have made so many decisions in negative directions that they actually have lost all sight of what a healthy reference point is.
That's crazy. Yeah, they've spiraled.
It's almost like they've reached a point of no return.
Wow.
And so you would expect that individual could go back to a kind of homeostasis. But ultimately, they've so often made decisions that have been truly destructive for others, that if they were to actually turn back the hand of time, or turn back their way to the extent they could actually be honest about what their actions have done to their immediate environment, I think those realities would be too painful to live with.
That's why you need to learn forgiveness. I promise you this much. If you are somebody that's in the process of growth, you need to learn forgiveness, because I promise you, if you're going to be at least willing to open up about the parts of you that are repressed, you better learn how to forgive yourself. And, having a faith rooted in forgiveness can really help somebody grow in ways that they could never imagine.
And actually having a faith rooted in God being love, and there being an access point to unconditional love and positive regard and acceptance allows us to forgive. I think in the absence of those realizations, it is very difficult to truly let go and forgive if someone has hurt the self. It's actually not about us. It's about how our lives can affect change in those that we encounter. It's about the greater good of all. And I think
that's the most selfish thing you can ever be animated by.
And I think we have this allergic reaction to the word God in the society we live in. And so I realized that it's an interesting time because people don't have a framework. They don't have a point of relativity, or a reference point that is truly going to help them come back to a healthier frame of mind or state of being. We're just making up our rules as we go along as demigods.
Yeah, that doesn't really help anybody.
No. So it's one thing to speak about the insights that you have, but if you're working with someone who really doesn't have a framework of human betterment and spirit and an understanding of the existential and how you're connected to that as a human being. Call it God, call it the universe, call it the creator, or however you want to term or phrase it. I think it's all open to interpretation. But I think if there is no framework, we suffer. if there is no structure, we suffer.
Yeah.
There is no true freedom in the absence of structure.
Well, that's the very masculine thing, structure. And so I mean, like,
Yeah.
to tie it into the
We
whole
thrive.
conversation.
We thrive in response
structure.
to it.
Women thrive in relationship to limitation, and that in a lot of ways.
And men.
Of course.
Yeah.
And and men, of course, we're as human beings, but I was taken in relationship to the masculine being order, feminine being chaos, right? Which is, and also we have those within ourselves as beings, right?
Yeah.
I really do believe that when on this journey of discovering yourself and what you are capable of doing, you have to learn how to forgive yourself. And I was one of the hardest things for me to do. When I stopped trying to be the closet nice guy, the silent manipulator, which I was like, you would never imagine, Lisa. You don't get it. The devil wasn't the guy that actually walked out in a suit with the nice car with 2 girls over his arms. No, it was me when I was hiding. That was the darkest version of me. As crazy as it was, right? Like, your willing incorporation of the dark characteristics of yourself means that you've also accepted forgiveness, yourself, and an adventure with an ideal that you're pursuing. You know how important that is. And you can't just let it come knocking to your door. Yeah, I remember, narcissistic, manipulative, psychotic, dismissive, critical, unaware, destructive, all of them, all the above. Still 6'3" and handsome, and that's also even more dangerous because people will project what they want you to be, not what you are. And I remember that when I made this decision to be an honest, good man, I wasn't before, and I heard this voice, and this voice was the very voice that has changed my life that I still listen to this very day. It was the first time I heard it. That voice told me, "Are you a good person?"
What do you think that voice was?
It was the stillest, most silent voice that I ever heard in my life that shuddered to my core. There's like a place at the bottom of your spine where a voice can echo to that just rattles you like this. I went pale in the morning, and I remember at the time I was just working in fitness, which was my business at the time. And I just wanted to bury it. I was like, is there a bag of chips I can eat? Is there like something I could drown this with? And I just kept, it was just changing my very molecules, the molecules in my body. And I believe that voice is the spirit that's connected to God. That's exactly what surrounds us all the time. And this was because of my willingness to investigate my own nature. And I know that when people want to wake up, don't try to investigate what self-discovery is or who God is. That's not how you find God. No, you find God through the very depth that you're willing to seek in yourself. And what you are capable of doing in terms of destruction, that's where He is. It's in the void. And as crazy as that sounds, the very next couple months, I started integrating a lot of these things. I started noticing a lot more of my behaviors, how destructive it was. I became far more insecure and anxious. And that was never my facade. My facade was always charming and charismatic and very... You're
becoming aware of your vulnerabilities.
Yes, but it was like my throat started getting locked up. Anxiety started building. And I was like, okay, God, this voice. This voice didn't mean anything. I'm a good person. I give charity. And then when I heard that, I was like, you can't lie to yourself. If you resorted to the fact that you give charity to determine whether you're a good person, get those words out of your mouth. And so I remember there was a very crucial point in my life where one of my very close family members got married to a girl, and I was so blown away by the quality of the girl, not in a positive way, but in a negative sense. And I speak about this publicly, and I even make it very clear to the person that's in. Yeah, they're still together. A lot of things have transformed, but I remember that particular was for me, not to actually criticize their particular relationship right now. I'm not doing that, but I'm telling you that particular message at that point in my life sent me a signal to say, are you ready to unleash? Now, this is what people need to be willing to do. Not only did it bring me closer to my faith, it brought me closer to who I am, Naftali Moses. And so I had this vow of abstinence, and I thought that I was like going to be this, the next woman I kiss or have sex with will be my wife. And I just came out of a relationship, the classic traumatized response of overcorrection, right? I was clear, where I met my first girlfriend? She was shaking her ass on the table, and I took her into the bathroom. That's how I met her. And then we had our perfect facade of a relationship, right? A lot of hiding there. And so once I saw this image burned in my head that if I didn't face this part of me, I would continue to hurt others. And, sometimes that was also part of, maybe I didn't see what my brother was experiencing, but I saw my inner world in relationship to what my family was experiencing at the time. And so I remember I said, I'm going to be letting out a lot of the things that I've been hiding. I've realized all of these behavior. I'm going to be unleashing this. I'm not going to be repressing my desires. I'm going to be interacting with them voluntarily. I'm not going to deny that they exist. No, they don't just exist. My desire for these things are so powerful that I need to unleash them, and that will be the very being of the driving force of my life. I said, I've been hiding behind the guises of wanting to be this good man, this patriarch, this loving husband and father who wants children. No, 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 no. I don't give a shit about any of those things. I've been hiding behind it. And I'm actually so much to the point want to annul this vow with my friends. And so we're all there at the after party. Some had their joints, some had their beers. And I'm there literally shuddering. And I still had this anxiety. Wow. Because of course I'm living with a feral tiger that's never been fed. And I'm agreeing to what? Feed it, right? I'm agreeing to get into the heavy machinery that you call life. That we exist in this body and the responsibility that we bear and the effect that we have on others in relationship to our character. You can't just sit down watching movies all day. You can't just disassociate scrolling on TikTok. All of those things are the problematic disaster of dehumanization. You understand what happens? What happens is unawareness. Unawareness with what we are capable of doing. And so I was noticing these very vows were the very things that I hid behind. And when I annulled that vow, it was like my sense of humor came back. I cannot explain this to you, but I was disassociating from me. And when I embraced it and I allowed it, I also accepted one thing, that I will hurt others. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds very dark. I will also face myself for finding that the only thing I care about is me. And then the last one was, I will learn what forgiveness is. And then it was just like, whew, I became one with that. And then it was running with the animal, not running away from it. And that very being, especially for men, is the beginning of the transformation process, because that brought me closer to God. It brought me closer to my faith. It brought me closer to my identity. It brought me closer to my desires. And also those desires began to animate into an individual, right? And so when we say the word individual, I really mean it's somebody who's aware of what they can do to others and how many dimensions that the human being functions under. That's an individual, somebody who cares, somebody who really wants to have a chip in the game. I promise you that. If you have a chip in the game, you can really hurt others. And you can't lie to yourself when you see it.
There's so much value in what you're saying, that in being truly honest with yourself and really facing yourself head on and recognizing that all this conditioning that we try to make our own and live out, carry that forward, it actually makes us these repressed individuals that act out in other ways that are harmful, not just to ourselves, but the individuals we encounter. And until we can truly be honest in who we are and what we want, we cannot actually move forward with conviction in a way that is uplifting for the greater good of those around us. So it's really powerful to actually allow yourself to go through those valleys of darkness in order to emerge a more integrated person and version of yourself. So I think that's
acceptance.
It's beautifully put. Like accepting who you are, accepting your vulnerabilities and your flaws.
And forgiveness are two very things that allow us to interact in life without rejecting everything that we are and criticizing everything that we do. If you do not learn how to interact with these and how these things don't just interact with, these things don't exist in your hubris. They exist outside of you.
Yeah.
Acceptance. That's a cosmic idea. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness? Mm-hmm. What, you're going to forgive yourself? Mm-hmm. You've only said that you're a piece of shit. I promise you, you're not going to believe it. I forgive me. No, you don't. Right? No, it's tapping into the very essence of maybe, how the am I supposed to know everything? How am I supposed to be perfect? And I think a lot of people try to overcorrect that in a lot of ways. They're like, I just accept myself for who I am, and I don't really need to care about my actions. I'm just a being and a spirit that floats in the wind. And you're like,
and there are no consequences.
You are a dangerous person when you say those things.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. Individuals who don't recognize the impact that they have on others and that there are consequences and there is a price to pay, whether it be, whether you believe in a next life or karma or however you want to think about it, but ultimately you have to live with the ramifications of those actions daily, whether it just be looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, well, am I a good person? Is this really what I've become? Is this who I want to be?
That changed my life.
But I also want to emphasize this. You have been raised in a unique context where you have been made, acutely aware of what it means to be a good person. And I think in the context and the society that we live in as a whole, more broadly speaking, those definitions are so open to interpretation that there are very few people that get back to this place of reckoning where they think, oh, am I good? No, because good becomes whatever their definition is at any given point in time.
Yeah,
that is
really
truly
dangerous. That's truly dangerous.
That's truly harmful.
And yeah, when you judge things that are good based off the things that you feel, you distort morality. And that's exactly eating of the fruit, right? It's the forbidden fruit. It's the idea that you're omniscient.
You
you're
become
not
delusional.
omniscient, right? And so that's actually the beginning of delusion, right?
Yeah.
Where there's delusion, there is rejection of the divine. And that's exactly what rejects the natural process of growth that we all have. You know, babies grow into young boys, into young teenagers, into young men, into mature men, right?
Yeah.
That's the process of life.
And we are creating an increasingly disillusioned society the more we move away from teaching these frameworks.
Yeah, and it's beautiful to see how necessary they are to progress the very humanity that we want to see in the world, right?
Yeah.
The abandonment of it in the name of humanity is not humanity. That's called hedonism, right? The incorporation of it into humanity is the way by which you can see humanity's strength and its beauty.
And you know what else? And this is interesting, and this is a finding. What breeds true happiness is cultivating high quality relationships. And
do you want to know who's responsible of that? And I wanted to kind of tie this back into the other things. Women. Women are responsible for bringing people together.
Creating community.
You know, that very drive
So true.
for creating community is a very feminine desire to be surrounded by people.
Yeah.
Women are the ones, hey, it's your birthday this week, we're going to get the family together. Men are like, you know, like, we don't focus on that. That creates beauty in the world, you know? Hey, my wife made this event. I'm sure you've heard that all the time. Thanks to her, because it wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have got an invite. I would have forgot. I would have been too focused on doing the things that guys do.
To be honest, that is more
That
true.
is a feminine drive. The desire to have people around you, the desire for connection, the very need for that is femininely inspired. And look at how much beauty that creates. It keeps people together. You understand? That means that men protect things that matter. You know, I know this with men, working with them, is that sometimes they work so hard and they put so much into everything in their life, and they do it because of an inspiration that they once had to protect something of value that they loved, until eventually they forget why they do it. And then the very man disappears.
Become resentful as well.
Empty, bitter.
Yeah, exactly.
In opposition of why they started it. And because if love isn't what matters most, then what does a man really protect?
Well, I think this often happens as a function of being detached from the true source of love.
It takes a whole lot to be attached to it.
Well, I think it is that we don't really know, I don't think we really understand how we're capable of love. And
That's a really wise point, yeah.
Yeah, and I think
it's an ideal. We strive towards it. I make that very clear to women who talk about how much they love their partners. I'm like, you just attached yourself to them, ripped them apart, and then because they couldn't give you your sense of validation, you still love them. It's not love. You just hate yourself. You know, you have to be able to understand that love is an ideal. Love takes work. Love takes deep understanding. Love takes deep investigation. Love is what you are here to bring. And before people start diving into what their definition of it is, no, you're going to spend the rest of your life discovering how much more love you can give and how that definition will always change.
that's so true.
And it will progress throughout the course of your life.
And that being said, this might be, I think, one of the single most overlooked things. Love is sacrifice. Love requires compromise.
I don't like the word compromise.
A sacrifice in the sense...
It requires sacrifice. I make a big distinction with compromise, because I know most men that say, you know, like, you have to compromise for a relationship. If you ask them to see their testicles, they're gone. They're not there anymore. They're completely removed. And I'm just saying that they've compromised the very essence of it.
Give me a better word for it.
For example, compromise is
because sacrifice
lose.
actually sounds worse. That sounds like a zero-sum game.
Yes, to compromise something is at the cost of you to maintain. To sacrifice something is your willingness to let go of a part of you to come closer to what you desire. Big difference.
Wow, I love that.
So it is a game of sacrifice. And by the way, there's an importance of linguistics, and you know, sometimes semantics aren't that important, but in this particular regard, I've noticed that a lot of the time, I ask this to all the time in people in my community. They're all there, they're married, they have 6 kids. How's the marriage? Making it work. Come on, you know, you just got to compromise. You hear it, you see a young guy, a guy that's looking to create a beautiful life with a beautiful woman, and he's hardworking and inspired, and he talks about how he wants to incorporate the sexual nature along with the values. And what do most of the guys who've cut their balls off say? The ones that have compromised. You got to lower your standard, man. You're not going to find that. So by you rejecting how you have failed, you bring down others who aspire towards success. And that exists in a lot of the relational advice that you're seeing, is that their dream is dead.
You know what is interesting to me is that you equate compromise with failure. And once again, this is just a function of semantics. But if you read the latest literature on game theory and how it relates to...
Game theory?
So game theory is the concept of the zero sum. Like, so for example, if I win because you've lost, or you win, and therefore that means I must have lost. So what we ultimately want, I mean, that doesn't breed trust in relationships or healthier outcomes in relationships.
Well, that sounds like tactic. That sounds like weapons.
But we live in this culture that makes it feel like that's how we should live. And ultimately that creates competition within relational dynamics where we should be breeding safety and trust. And the only way to breed safety and trust is if you believe that your partner wants as much of the best for you, the best outcome for you, to the same extent that they want the best outcome for themselves. And that is when I think about creating...
I'm down to talk about that.
I mean, I still can't think about a better word than compromise at this point, simply because when I hear sacrifice, I think it means that once again, we're back to a zero-sum game, where I've sacrificed my desire in order for you to have the outcome that you desire. And I think for relationships that truly thrive, and where there is a symbiotic energy where we're elevated by one another. There's a mutual vision, and it's
a collective goal.
If my partner is losing, I'm losing, because we are one.
Yeah, back to partner selection, right? Make sure you pick the right person so that you make sure that they're in your court. And it's
but
actually
even if you pick a perfect, beautiful, life-giving individual to do life with, there are going to be desires that they have that are in conflict with what you want in those specific moments.
Yeah, in those specific moments,
especially
right?
In child
but that's the beauty of genuine trust, that the person desires the same things that you do, because in the journey of life, you're going to need conflict, and in that conflict, there's going to be contribution. Contribution to things that allow you to get what you truly desire. And so really more of it about compromise than it is actually realizing that this is the best possible solution for what you both collectively desire. You're on the same team. So it's not, I need to beat you. It's no, let's just say I am right, but it has nothing to do with me beating you, right? It's not about beating you, but actually collectively what we believe is best for the relationship. And so it's also very important to clarify that in a conflict, which is, I'm on your team. You want to go there? This is how we're going to go there. I promise you, you thinking you're going to zip line from this balcony all the way down there is not going to work, because that's not a zip line. That's a telephone wire, right? So it doesn't have anything to do with me being right, or that very well being that I love my partner. You don't want them to up, right? And not in that sense, you really don't want them to take the telephone wire down to the beach.
And this brings me to, this is so interesting, because I think historically men are less open to influence from their partners.
Historically,
even now. I think
that men have been influenced by women and they don't even know it.
Yes, for sure. But I think when they become cognizant of the fact that they're being influenced, there's more resistance. But I think
because men don't like losing they don't want to be guided by something that isn't seeking their best interest. And genuinely, like if a mother does a really good job of that, she wants her child best, right? But also there needs to be a level of, hey, I think that your best is your suggestion can hurt me. That's called having an open conversation.
But there is a strong correlation between relational satisfaction and the ability to take the influence or receive or be receptive to your partner's influence. And so I think it's really important sometimes for men to step outside of their desire to say, cool, I'm right, I know what's best. And
that would be a very closed off man who's attached to a particular ideology that's actually limiting him as a man.
Exactly, which is why the empathy bit is so important. So
yeah, of course.
Can you
Intuition,
access your empathy, your vulnerability to
security
the extent, to the extent that you're truly willing to listen to what your partner has to say, not with a desire to respond or with a made-up mind, but with an openness, a receptivity, an ability to be influenced by your partner's desires in order to move the needle forward. So you are a leader with a servant heart that has the best outcome. But if you're going to be a dogmatic individual with a top-down approach, I promise you it's going to breed unhappiness and dissatisfaction.
No, you'll actually destroy the very thing you swore to protect.
And not just that.
And you won't even know it.
You're going to destroy the trust. You're You're going to destroy the trust that your partner has in you, the faith that you truly want the best for the whole, for the dynamic. And ultimately, if you're just operating with your own selfish desires center stage and pushing towards the outcome that you desire, you are going to create disconnect in something that should be operating in unison.
You know, there's a certain kind of strength that a man needs to have, and also kind of an understanding of the divine, that the feminine is in relationship to the masculine. You know, you have to deeply consider the feminine. In fact, actually, you wouldn't be very masculine if you did. You know, your insecurities would have you by the balls, and you would never actually have any kind of growth in your life, and everything would be about you, and you would never know connection ever, because you've only made love to yourself. That's a majority of men who are too attached to power. That's a majority of men who can't understand a greater good. That's a majority of men who don't understand a higher truth. And if I had to point out there and tell you how many of them there are, there's more than you can count.
Specifically in Los Angeles.
Oh, in Los Angeles, everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's true.
I mean, honestly, just talking with you has been so exciting, so wonderful, so amazing. I really have nothing more to delve into, because it was just so...
I think there's just so much talk about masculine and feminine. I think at the heart of what I was hoping to achieve in speaking to you is just creating more awareness about the impact that our actions have on the individuals around us, and that we can affect meaningful change by choosing to represent the qualities that we want to see exhibited by others, and also making actionable steps towards cultivating connections with those that actually do bear the fruit of the lives that we desire.
Absolutely.
We can affect change by truly recognizing the social landscape and making wise decisions about who we want to invest our time with. And if there is a cluster of individuals who are wise about how they cultivate family and unity and lasting relationships, and there's this thing in South Africa called Ubuntu culture, where basically you are encouraged to love other people's children as you love your own. So if we can cultivate a society where we are so tuned into how we can be of value to others to affect positive change, that'll have ripple effects for generations to come. And the major concern that I have with a highly individualistic society that's so focused on self-preservation, hedonistic pursuits, is that we are cultivating and rearing children that have increasing mental health issues and comorbidities, more so than ever before. And there is a very, very strong link between marital conflict and even things like borderline personality disorder, depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
There are funders across the world investing huge amounts of money into propagating or expanding the kind of drug base that we can offer people and make accessible to them at within a second. But what is really going to help us prevent the onset of systematic decay in terms of family dynamics is to truly move towards doing the best that we can in order to exhibit those positive qualities and recognize that we can affect community, and in doing so, generations.
One rule of thumb, and it's, if you want to judge a tree, it's by its fruit.
Yeah.
The fruit of our generation right now.
Yeah.
Would you bet on that?
I believe. I have hope.
I have hope. Don't get me wrong.
And it begins here. It begins in this room. It begins with propagating a message.
That hope is exactly what we're here to speak about. And one of the things that I wanted to do before we end this off is to talk about the importance of what you shared there, and the one last thing that people can start connecting to, which is, you want to know if you connect to something, you can speak about it. Having a connection to your ideas means that it's directly connected to you, through you. And you can share that to the future generations. And so that's a big problem nowadays, is that there are people that have voices and a connection to their values. And then there are a bunch of people who just assume that they can listen. No. You have a divine right in your life to seek your life and what's true to you. And then from that point, you can actually start connecting yourself to the collective truth that we have together. And that's where human betterment is made.
So my question to you is, do you believe in the family, and why?
What do you think?
Well, I know, but I want to hear your answer.
I believe it's not just the base building block of
a healthy society.
But I believe it's the birth of the individual and the process by which somebody can interact with their life in its totality. It's the process by which somebody can see what they are made of, what are the parts of themselves that they have not interacted with, and truthfully why they are here. And eradication of that process is really a rejection of everything that's beautiful, everything that is utilized to strengthen mankind. And when a man can accept fatherhood and what it means to be a husband, and a wife can accept motherhood and what it means to be a wife, those people are actually transcended people who didn't just take upon a role that was there for them to pick up. They worked their damn asses off with intention and a genuine desire to connect with who they can become through this process. This process is the very process by which people can become limitless through the limited, and that is the process by which people start to feel fulfilled. And that is through the family creating process, and through building that, what you not only create for the world, but what you create for yourself.
So this is one more question I have. How do you think we can cultivate a people who have the desire for stable, enduring partnerships? Because that is what is under attack.
Yeah, well, I mean, how can we cultivate that? Well, that's great. Well, you need to start incorporating the foundation that actually means that you have to show up. You have to start having values around growth, values around vulnerability, a desire for this kind of,
for unity in marriage. So I think often when, as coaches, we see an individual, a person, I think there's so much value in actually working with couples in conjunction with one another because, as I've said before, they co-regulate. And ultimately, if you can truly see the individual sitting next to you, their triggers, what has caused some maladaptive tendencies, that can extract an empathy in you that can cultivate a more harmonious bond between you. So I think there's so much emphasis on the individual, but I would love to see a shift towards the emphasis on couples and the family and us operating as a whole rather
the individual is born not because you see the godless idea that the individual is something that exists without the feminine or the feminine exists without the masculine. That's exactly how you separate them, right? You know, when men really become who they are is when they're married. That's something I noticed. They become hyper individualized, and you're like, what? Same thing with women.
Could
they
you
become
use a different
more
terminology
themselves.
for that?
Well, I'm using both because I want to show you how that terminology can be utilized in collective relationships, right? So the individual is born with the feminine as a man and as a woman, the masculine. That's actually you.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy thing that the ego likes to do is separate that idea that you're separate. Of course, what the ego do when you start actually dating in relationships, it's used as a form of protection. And then you start to use that to create more distance between your partner.
It breaks down the very thing that you truly crave and desire as a human being, which is a sense of love and belonging. So, I mean, I realize we have this kind of polarity. We want both love and connection and closeness as well as, the excitement of novelty. But ultimately, at the heart of what we truly want is a sense of belonging and a safe place to return to. And if we can't be vulnerable enough to be true to ourselves and recognize what is limiting us from cultivating deep connectedness, we will never really get there. So I think the work you do is really valuable in helping people move away from trauma or the kind of traumatic instances that have caused maladaptive tendencies that break down connection to actually be a valuable part of a whole. But then I think there's so much incredible work that we can do in helping people turn towards one another with more intentionality in order to really be constructive, beautiful contributors to, I think, one of the greatest gifts we can access in this life, coupleship or family, when done well.
Beautifully said. And I believe that it takes a very feminine woman to spread that message, and you may continue to do so with strength.
I take that, Shem. Thank you.
Because I mean, it's the importance of this is very much like as you said, the beauty that we wish to see is going to be from when we start taking this seriously. And I think that's beautiful because that means there's a journey. We're not quite there yet. Well, great. Isn't that the whole point? You got an adventure ahead. You got a skyline of potential, a place that you can go to discover yourself and to see what happens along the way. And maybe you can have a little faith. You can learn a little bit about grace. You can learn a little bit about acceptance and forgiveness, and you'll have a story to tell. And I think that when people start looking at life that way, it's not so much just about following a system or a set of rules, but actually taking what you need into what you don't know to really find what's valuable and then to give that back to the world. Anyways, Lisa, what an absolute pleasure to have you here, to have this conversation, and I hope we do it again.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Such a privilege.